Okay. Thanks for getting the opportunity to be here again. This is the 10th time, I think. I'm here to present finfish production estimates. We also have mussel estimates in the package. Really nice to see all the familiar faces. And my co-authors, let me see. Here are my co-authors. It's my name brother, the taller and more handsome Ragnar, and Daryl over there. Ragnar, the tall and handsome, he provides valuable data from the northern hemisphere, but also some data on species in warmer waters. And the big guy over there, the one and only Daryl, he does a tremendous job collecting the survey data from all over the world. He does this by pushing the GAA survey to all kinds of people and organizations without any hesitation, without any feeling of shame. And that is useful for us. So both Ragnar the handsome and Daryl the giant, they do a tremendous job, and they share their insights on global aquaculture. Should also mention my wife this time, who is not only beautiful, but also sometimes helpful. She actually set up the survey data this time for us to analyze and did some quality assurance work on the data. So it is a true teamwork indeed. And that teamwork, as I said, includes the large number of organizations and people who contributed. Some of you are here today. All in all, we got over 300 country species observations through the GAA survey. Would not have been possible at all without these people and organizations, and I can say on behalf of GAA that we are truly grateful for the service that you provide. My strategy here, as before, is only to give you a taste of what is going on with individual species. Some of the smaller species are not presented here individually, only in the summary, but you will have the opportunity to study them carefully when you get the full presentation package from GAA. If you're a normal person and you sit down with those data, I would strongly recommend that you use some kind of alcohol or recreational drug. Well, I will focus more on summarizing developments. And let's start with the freshwater fishes. Yes, okay, so first of all, we focus on the internationally traded species. We have forecasts for 2015 and 16, also for 2017 for some species. And here are the species that are included, but as I said, we're not going to show all of them individually. Freshwater fishes, tilapia. As you know, tilapia is the most diversified species geographically, and also in other dimension. Has continued to add production over time. It is expected to produce 5.1 million tons in 2015, 3.8% growth from 2014. Next year, it is expected to grow by 4.2% to 5.3 million tons, which is still significantly lower than the average growth rate over the over earlier years, which has been around 10%. When we look at the representative price, the US import price for frozen fillet, we find that the real prices have been between $4 and $5 per kilo since 2008. Increased last year slightly to above $5, and has on average been $4.6 per kilo the first 8 months of this year. So the increase in production we have seen since 2008 has not led to lower market prices. And that indicates that the demand for tilapia has also shifted with supply. As we see from this slide, China is the leading tilapia producer, followed by Indonesia and Egypt. And now comes a shocker. our sources do not agree on production levels for the major producing countries. I'll come back to that on China. But we compute averages. So that is, so I can say it like this. We are an equal opportunity survey user. If you hand us a survey, we do not discriminate by putting less weight on your survey unless we have some very credible information that you are not trustworthy. So basically, we take a flat average of the survey numbers that we get for a certain country and a certain species in a given year. So this year, average estimate for China, 1.6 million tons, 940,000 for Indonesia, and 625,000 for Egypt. And all these countries are expected to increase next year. And here we see the range of estimates from different sources on China. You see that some of them are anonymous. For 2015, the range between the low and the high is from 1.5 to 1.8 million metric tons. And in 2016, the range is also in between 1.5 and 1.8 million tons. Let's move on to catfishes and pangasius first. Pangasius is not only a species with a broad market base globally, has also diversified in terms of production, and the stagnation in Vietnam that we will look more closely at means that its share of production is below 50% now. Total production from the countries reporting is around 2 million metric tons in 2015, dropped from 2.1 million tons in 2014, and it's predicted to go further down in 2016 to 1.9 million tons. Also on pangasius, there are discrepancies between our sources. This is shown in this slide on Vietnam. So each point represents one source in a given year. Sorry about the small dots there, but for example, the range for 2015 is from 900,000 to 1.2 million tons. So when we take the averages of these, of our sources on this slide, Vietnam is expected to have a drop in production from 2014 to 2015, from 1.1 to 1 million tons. Production is expected to decline further in 2016, down to around 900,000 tons. Declining prices is a part of the story, but since 2013, the EU and the US import prices have been fairly stable, around $3 per kilo in the US and $2.5 per kilo in the EU. So it doesn't explain the whole story. If we move on to catfish in total, well, that's a mixed bag. We are struggling. I said it last year, I say it again, we're struggling with the data coverage here. According to the numbers we have, Vietnam, China, India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh are among the largest producers. Total production in those countries we cover has reached levels of 3.7 million tons in 2015, around the same level as the previous year. US import price of frozen catfish fillet has increased from the low level of $4 per kilo in 2013 to $6 in 2015. Did I say 3? I meant 4. Production is expected to remain at roughly the same level next year. And 2 years ago, we added the Godzilla of global aquaculture, carps. So now we're in a different order of magnitude here. Total production of the sectors that we have included in our survey is around 25 million tons in 2015, up by around 7% from the previous year. Next year, production is expected to increase by 6% to 26 million tons. Let's now move on to the diadromous fishes. Atlantic salmon. expected to reach a production of 2.2 million tons this year, up by 2.5% from 2014. As we see from the slide, prices fell from 2014 to 2015 to around $8 per kilo for Chilean fillet export and around $5 per kilo for whole gutted salmon into the EU. Still, prices provide good margins for efficient salmon producers. Next year, production is expected to be around the same level as the current year. We see on this slide that the two main producers, Norway and Chile, will maintain roughly the same production this year as in 2014. And you also see that they are not going to add volume next year. Coho production is partly bouncing back to 2013 levels after a sharp decline in 2014. But after reaching an expected level of 162,000 tons this year, production is expected to decline again by 7% next year. And this increase in production this year was accompanied by a decrease in the export price of Chilean coho frozen from $5.7 to $4.9 per kilo so far. And we see on this slide that Chile, by far the dominant producer, is driving the ups and downs of coho production. Large rainbow trout farmed in marine waters, still on a path of decline from the peak 2012 levels, expected to decline by 10% in 2015 to 257,000 tons. Next year, production is predicted to decline slightly to around 250,000 tons. We see that prices are not helping rainbow trout production, as the prices have declined from the peak levels of around $7 to levels between $4 and $5 per kilo this year. And we see again on this slide that Chile is the main driver of the volatility in production. And then we have the cute small trout, primarily farmed in freshwater, still on a slight upward trend. Production increasing by around 5% to 600,000 tons this year. Next year, production is expected to increase further by 7% to 640,000 tons. On the next slide, on this slide, we see the relative diversity of small trout production in terms of producing countries. Although the neighboring countries, Iran and Turkey, together have around 40% of global production. Next, we move to the marine fishes, bass and bream. Sea bass and bream produced in the Mediterranean is expected to decline by 5% to around 300,000 tons this year. Next year, production is expected to remain at the same level. And you see that prices have not provided much incentive to growth, as they have been more or less stable. You don't see it, now you see it. They have been more or less stable since 2004. And they have been declining from 2011 levels. So we see that the prices so far this year is around $6 per kilo. Okay, now we move to the summary. So we have gone through many of the species. As I said in the beginning, those that were omitted will be found in the full presentation package. And now I go on with the summary. Before we focus on the data that we have collected, we will see what has happened to growth in the longer run, in earlier years. Look at the development here from 1990, where we rely on FAO's global data. We see from this graph that production has increased from 9 million tons in 1990 to 47 million tons in 2013. The last year, FAO has presented data. So in other words, production has increased roughly 5 times, which is pretty impressive. And so what about growth rates? And since there is some focus here at GOAL on the 10-year growth rate, Wally had showed you some numbers on that earlier. I also showed the 10-year, the percentage change during a 10-year period. And what we see here is that the 10-year growth rate has been declining over time. Until 2004, it was over 100%, implying more than a doubling. Afterwards, the growth rate has been below 100%. So at the end of the FAO reporting period, we see that the 10-year growth rate is approaching a doubling again. What about prices? This figure shows the price indices for total seafood and aquaculture products. These indices are produced in collaboration between FAO, my own university, and the Norwegian Seafood Council. And it's actually my younger and much more promising brother Sigbjørn who does much of the work on these price indexes. So there are actually smart people in our family too. We see that the aquaculture price index it did not increase until 2002, and afterwards it has experienced an upward trend. So prices should have contributed to growth in the latter period. But we also see some volatility towards the end, with a drop in 2012 and then a partial recovery in 2013. Let's now look at the more recent picture. And first, I'm going to show you a couple of messy slides, show you the growth rates for the individual species from 2013 to 2016, just to remind you about the diversity of growth patterns. And here we see the diadroma species. See a mixed picture indeed from year to year, also across species. Atlantic salmon has low growth rates in 3 or 4 years. Coho salmon, as you see, exhibit considerable growth volatility, while the small trout has fairly high growth rates, except for 1 year. You see the large rainbow trout with its decline, as I pointed out. Milkfish, which we had data on the Philippines and Taiwan, have pretty low growth rates. And then you have barramundi, which is expected to have fairly stable growth rates, around 8% actually in all years from 2014 to 2016. If we move on to the freshwater species, we see that growth rates by and large tend to be higher, with an exception for pangasius in Vietnam, which you saw that were in decline. In 2015, carps are expected to grow by 7%, tilapia by 4%, and catfishes are expected to have 0 growth. If we look at the marine species, here's the picture, mixed indeed. We'll look more into what this means for marine species on aggregate. This is the total production of the surveyed species when we include carps. This is from 2002 and until 2016, not 2015, as it says on the top. So in 2013, our surveyed sectors covered 34 million tons of the 47 million tons produced in total in the world, according to FAO. We see that production has increased from 16 million tons in 2002 to an expected level of almost 40 million tons in 2016 and 38 million tons in 2015. What about the growth rates? As we have been reminded earlier, doubling in a decade requires 7.2% annual growth. In this slide, we have added the percentage growth rates implied by these production figures. They're all on the positive side. In 2013, production was still, or growth was still as high as 9.6%. But then you see a path of decline to 6.4% in 2014, 5.8% in 2015, 2015 and expected, 4.8 in 2015 and then 4.5 in 2016. And here we exclude the carps. Now we see the remaining species. They covered 12 million metric tons of the total 47 million tons produced globally. And we see that production has increased from 4.4 million tons in 2002 to 13 million tons in 2015. When we include the growth rates, in this slide, we see indeed a volatile growth pattern. There are numbers above the magic 7.2% threshold. From the low of the financial crisis around 2009, we saw a great recovery of growth rates to 16% in 2012. But from there on, it has gone downhill in the sense that growth rates have become much lower. So in 2013, the growth rate was around 0 according to our figures. 2014, it was 6%. 2015, it was 1.6%. And 2016 expected to be around 2%. So how is the split then between different species groups or farming environments? And here's the picture when we include carps again. So we see that the freshwater fish represents the main bulk of production. In 2015, the freshwater sector represented 33.5 million tons, diadroma species 3.9, and marine sectors tiny 0.5 million tons. Maybe I was a little bit quick there. It's also worth noting the price development, the price index for aquaculture, which you have seen before, the red line. The growth we see here has been accompanied by increasing prices. The only exception is the drop from 2011 to 2012. When we drop carps from the picture, here we dropped carps, production goes from 34 million tons to 8.8 million tons in 2015. It's still, however, much bigger than the freshwater production is still much bigger than the diadromas and marine sectors. And remember that the diadromas fish species, they are primarily produced in marine environments. So even when we add the diadroma species produced in marine waters with the marine, so-called marine species, we see that the freshwater sector is bigger. So as before, we can conclude that the vast marine oceans are much less exploited than the more scarce freshwater resources on this globe. Here's the growth rates within the species groups when we include carps in the freshwater sector. The 2003 to 2015 average growth rate is shown in parentheses here. The freshwater sector has the highest with 7.1%. Marine sectors grew on average by 6.8%, while the diadroma species increased by 5% on average. When we exclude the carps, the freshwater sector growth rates shifts upwards. So now the average growth rate for the freshwater sector from 2003 to 2015 is 12.2%. Again, it's interesting to note that the growth rates of the relatively more exploited freshwater is higher than for the less used marine environment. We see a downward trend in freshwater growth rates over time, as we see for marine fish. If you try to figure out for the diadroma species, it's not so hard to see a clear trend. There's some interest in whitefish. Whitefish include many environments, species, market segments. Some are, as you know, characterized by intense competition, especially the global market for frozen whitefish. And many of you are in that market, know it much better than me. Here we see the total whitefish production in our surveyed sectors. Production has increased from 2.6 million tons in 2002 to 9.9 million tons this year. We include here the annual growth rates for whitefish. We see that the growth rates were at the 2-digit level in the early years, and then there's a sharp fall around the financial crisis, 2009, recovering again to a peak of 15% in 2012, but then with a much lower growth rate afterwards. Last year there was a respectable 6.6%, but this year growth is expected to be around 1%, and next year around 2.5%. Prices may explain some of this development. So this figure has added the price indexes for aquaculture, total and whitefish. And we see that the whitefish price index, the green line, has not increased since 2008. So that means that whitefish productivity would have to compensate with higher productivity growth rates in the latter half of the period in order to sustain profitable growth. And then going back to Wally's introduction, doubling in a decade. Here we see the picture. It's a very mixed picture indeed at the individual species level. We have sorted the species according to their growth from 2005 to 2015. We see that all the species from turbot to barramundi more than doubled their production, was over 100%. But we also know that a few of these species, including pangasius, as we have seen, have experienced a peak before 2013. So the remaining species that we see further down, from grouper and downwards, they've had growth rates below 100%. So in other words, they have not been able to double production. And you see at the bottom there's a few sectors, two sectors which even have had negative growth. What if we look at the larger species groups and the total? What do we find? Well, again, a mixed picture. Marine species were not able to double, with a growth of 88% from 2005 to 15. Diadroma species increased by 66%. And freshwater species, when we exclude carp from the picture, increased by 194%. So in other words, production was almost 3 times higher in 2015 than in 2005. If we include carp in China, the freshwater sector roughly doubled its production. And if we look at the total, the total when we include carp is close to a doubling, with a 93% growth. When we exclude carp, we see a more impressive development, a growth of 135%. So until this year, our sectors have by and large been able to double their production in a 10-year perspective. But again, remember that most of the growth happened in the first half of this 10-year period. So as Wally pointed out, we have a job to do, which involves improving our scorecard in several areas. Thank you.